Hello friends, my name is JJ. So, one of the first political issues I ever felt comfortable debating was the issue of monarchy, specifically the case against monarchy. As you might know, my country of Canada is under the British Crown, and I joined Citizens for a Canadian Republic, which is Canada's leading anti-monarchy lobby group, when I was just a teenager. So suffice it to say, this is a topic I have given a lot of thought to over the years. And this week, I am going to give you the gist of my grand sweeping argument as part of a video debate I am having with my pal and fellow Vancouver YouTuber, Matt Baker, of the popular UsefulCharts channel. Matthew spends a lot of time discussing royalty-related stuff on his channel, particularly the history of various monarchical dynasties around the world, and he is taking the pro-monarchy position in our little dialogue. After you watch this video, be sure to check out his so you can see his rebuttal, and then maybe watch mine again. We wrote both of our scripts having seen each other's, meaning that in theory, we are going to engage with the best points that each other made. So let us get started. So the first thing I would say is that the question of political systems is a very complicated one and is often very context sensitive. I don't think anyone who has seriously studied political history can argue with a straight face that there is one system of government that is right for all countries in all situations at all times. There are certainly scenarios in which people had good reason to support a monarchical regime in order to uphold political stability or prevent some worse regime from coming to power. For example, we could talk about the American desire to keep the Japanese emperor enthroned after World War II, or the fact that most Western countries support the Jordanian royal family today. These are calculated decisions made out of a clear-eyed assessment of the facts on the ground, as opposed to some universal philosophical principle. But today we are going to talk about universal philosophical principles, because the question is, should monarchies still exist in the 21st century? Or as I interpret it, all things being equal, is monarchy still a system of government that has any inherent use? Is it a system we should want to survive on its own terms, as opposed to only in some sort of calculated, opportunistic way, like I described before? I would argue no, and I have two main reasons why. One is that monarchy is an inherently dishonest system of government, and thus doomed to continuously fail to deliver what it promises. And two, monarchy cannot be made compatible with a free society without sacrificing its core principles, thereby suggesting that the system really has no inherent value. At least to those of us who love freedom. So let us talk about the dishonesty of monarchy to begin. Monarchy as a philosophy is founded on a preposterous lie, which is the idea that God has ordained specific families to rule specific countries. Here in Canada, every single coin is stamped with the Latin phrase Dei Gratia Regina, or Queen by the grace of God. And it's been said that the reason why Queen Elizabeth does not retire is because she takes seriously this idea that she is in some sort of covenant with the Lord and that this is his mission for her on this earth. Now, who am I to determine the will of God, you might say? Perhaps he really did ordain certain families to rule over certain people, but even if you do believe that, you also have to believe that God has somehow been steering every ridiculous twist and turn in the long and sordid history of royal families, in which dynastic successions have been muddled up with military coups and illegitimate children and distant cousins being offered the throne in order to keep some more legitimate person off it, and so on. It seems like the Occam's razor explanation is that simply many of the world's grand historic monarchies are really just the surviving remnant of some long string of hereditary dictatorships, possessing no more inherent worth than any other system of government imposed by force. Many of the monarchies in existence today can't even claim some sort of grand, unbroken chain of history in the way that, say, the Japanese or Danish monarchy can. The Dutch monarchy, for instance, is just something that was established in 1815, following the Napoleonic Wars, while the first king of Norway was just a Danish prince installed by their parliament in 1905. The presidency of Colombia is a more historic office than either of these royal families. In short, it is very difficult to come up with any persuasive reason why any family that claims to be royal has a right to have an entire political system based around them, as opposed to just some random family living down the street from you. The best you can say is that, well, they got here somehow, so let's just stick with the status quo. And that might be a plausible argument if there was clear evidence that the status quo was working, but I'm not sure that there is. Monarchists like to say that modern royals are uniquely well suited to function as unifying and respectable heads of state, but I would say that this is a hugely dishonest argument as well. In Matthew's video, he talks about the quite modern British theory of royalty, which posits that in a democratic monarchy, which even monarchists concede is really the only defensible form, the king or queen or emperor is the head of the state, while some elected politician is the head of the government. The head of state does all of the fun ceremonial stuff like smash the champagne bottle on the new submarine, while the head of the government actually runs the country. The argument is that since elected politicians are by definition divisive and controversial people, a good system of government would keep them far away from ceremonial activities that are supposed to lift the collective spirit of the nation, lest they taint those wholesome rituals with controversy and divisiveness as well. But this argument can only really work in the context of a society where the monarch has a 100% approval rating and debates of the sort we are having right now do not exist. For instance, the King of Spain recently participated in what we would think of as a relatively innocuous ceremonial event, a march against terrorism, in which he was flanked by Spaniards of all different cultures and political beliefs. And yet, according to this story in the Sunday Times, every time the king appeared on the big screen, he was booed by the crowd. It doesn't matter what the motive of the people booing were. The point is that in a free society, everyone has the right to have any opinion they want about any public figure, including royals. And there are obviously no shortage of ways in which a royal person can be controversial, including simply by existing. This even happens in merry old England, where celebrities often refuse to accept knighthoods and other awards from the Queen because they don't support the monarchy system for one reason or another. Sometimes they see it as a symbol of racism or imperialism. Sometimes they see it as a symbol of inequality. Sometimes they just see it as a proxy for whatever political party is ruling England at the time. We are free to tell people that they are interpreting the monarchy incorrectly and they shouldn't think these things, but the fact is they do, and they always will in any society where freedom of belief exists. The only alternative would be to have a system like what they have in Thailand, where the monarchy is a universally revered institution of national unity, but that's only because they have all of these laws on the books that punish people for criticizing it. Not that I think this is going to happen anytime soon, but I would personally feel it to be a bit of a dilemma if the Queen ever offered me some sort of award or bauble. I would feel torn between my anti-monarchy political beliefs and my sense of patriotism, which is the very sort of crisis that the monarchy is supposed to be preventing from happening in the first place. So no, a monarch is not uniquely well-equipped to perform the functions of head of state better than a politician, because monarchy is a political idea and thus as divisive as anything else. The only difference is that monarchy lies about this fact. All right, now my second argument is that monarchy cannot be reformed. So the standard monarchist rebuttal to everything I said is to point out that some royal families are very popular. Indeed, more popular than the elected politicians. This is one of the main arguments that Matthew makes in his video. But once you even concede this point, you have already lost as far as I'm concerned. Does a monarchy derive its power from its ability to remain popular with the public like an elected politician? Or does the strength of the monarchy come from some otherworldly mandate, giving the monarch the right to do wildly unpopular things and be insulated from public opinion? If it's the former, then monarchs may just as well run in elections every 4 years, so we can be clear if they are popular enough with the public to stay in power or not. If it's the latter, then, well, the only reason why we have constitutional monarchies in the first place is because letting the monarchs do whatever they want did not prove to be a system that was very good for the monarchs themselves. This is why I say it is a system that cannot be made compatible to work with a free society. The fundamental essence of monarchy is undemocratic. The idea of a certain family being permanently ordained to rule on the basis of some higher authority is not a logic that can ever be fully reconciled with a democratic society. Monarchy and democracy are existential enemies, and democracy usually wins. This is why the number of monarchies has declined so precipitously over the last century. I know Matt likes his charts, so here is my chart showing how the number of democratic countries has increased as the number of monarchical countries has decreased. These days, the best you can hope to have in a monarchical country is a royal family that is trapped in some sort of never-ending PR campaign of trying to manufacture universal love and goodwill for themselves. But this in turn will just breed more resentment resentment from a free public that doesn't like to be told how to think. You saw this recently in Britain, where the BBC's round-the-clock coverage of Prince Philip's death provoked the most viewer complaints in BBC history. You really do get the sense these days that most monarchies in democratic countries are operating on borrowed time, hoping desperately to avoid someone truly unpopular coming to the throne that might finally tip a wavering public to the side of abolishment, while undemocratic monarchies, like I said, have to double down on outright repression to prevent criticism of themselves, no different from any other type of dictatorship. So let me close by conceding some points. I don't think it really matters all that much that monarchs are rich. I mean, we're not living in feudal times. Most of today's royal families live posh lives simply because the governments of their countries have chosen to fund these lifestyles. So I think it's better to think of royal families as just one more wasteful and ineffective government program, rather than resent the royals themselves for hoarding or stealing wealth from anyone else. As Matt correctly notes in his video, a lot of royals aren't even all that rich in today's age of multi-billionaires. They just behave in a sort of stereotypically old-fashioned upper-class way because they think that's what the public wants out of them. Blue blood porn, as the New Yorker's John Lee Anderson put it. Which gets to my final point. I think it is also kind of dumb to hate the royals as individuals. In many ways, I think that a lot of royal families in modern democracies are kind of pathetic and even somewhat tragic figures. Human beings that we have assigned jobs for life to parade around like theme park mascots for our own amusement.
I was liking it to Truman Show. Have you seen that movie?
Yep. It's a mix between the Truman Show and being in a zoo.
Virtually none of them exercise any significant political power these days, and of the very few powers that some of them do have, like presiding over the inauguration of parliamentary governments, basically all of their discretionary authority is so tightly restrained by lawyers and legal precedent as to make them little more than a rubber stamp on somebody else's decision. So what we're left with is basically an anachronism, an institution whose basis for existing in the first place is completely unpersuasive and can only really survive in the present age because one slice of the population happens to hold a personal preference for the ultra-manufactured sentimentality and aesthetics associated with princes and princesses and kings and queens. People are obviously free to enjoy their blue blood porn all they like, but it is not a sound basis for a system of government in the 21st century. At least, that's what I think. If you want to hear the other side of the story, be sure to check out Matt's video on his channel, and I will see you next week.